So, welcome to June's Slow-Fi Meetup, where we are going to talk about moving from ideas to action through experimentation. Okay. So, a little bit about me before we jump into this. I like to say I am a full time adventurer and human being, and I'm a part time writer, speaker, and coach. I'm a student of financial independence and lifestyle design, and a teacher at heart. So for me, no learning process is ever complete until I can turn around and share it with someone else. And so that's originally why I started the Pioneers, to be able to process the things that I was learning and to be able to share those with all of you, right? And all of the people that I come in contact with. Um, and so financial freedom is one of the core tenets of our philosophy, but we really believe that the journey to FI should be as remarkable as the destination. So we're not focused on making extreme sacrifices so that we can retire super early. Right? We're focused on designing a life that we truly love along that path to financial independence. And my husband and I actually just got back from a 3.5 month road trip where we traveled, all over out west. And so we returned back to Boston on Friday. So we're settling back in and figuring out what we want summer to look like. So I really appreciate everybody who filled out the survey to let me know what you wanted to learn in this session and to get a number of different ideas. And so it was really fun for me to read all of your big dreams and goals. And I was able to choose a few of them that we're going to talk through at the end of it. But yeah, thank you so much for doing that. So our goals for today's session are to define experimentation, and to understand why an experimentation approach is so valuable, to know the concrete steps to start experimenting, to walk through examples of going from your big idea down to small, immediate actions. Okay. And before we do that, for those of you who have been in these conversations before, I always ask people to make a commitment, to take some sort of action coming out of these conversations. And the reason why I do that, and many of you probably have heard this before, but the reason is that we listen differently when we're passively, taking something in versus listening for, okay, what's the specific thing that I learned and what am I going to do about it? Okay. So I actually want to turn to the comment section, similar to how we did in previous conversations. And I want to hear from you. Do you promise to take some sort of action coming out of this conversation? And I want to start seeing some yeses in the chat box. Oftentimes we see some pinky promises. And so let us know here in the chat if you are promising to take some sort of action coming out of this conversation. Awesome. So I'm seeing some yeses, absolutelys. Fantastic. Okay. So as we're getting into it, what I want to first ground us in is the lifestyle design process, okay? Because experimentation is part of, and really stage 3 of an overall lifestyle design process. And so this is going to situate that for you so you can get a sense of where it fits, as well as the kinds of things that you can start doing, along this process if you feel like you're more in another stage of the process. Okay. So stage 1 in a lifestyle design process is where you identify the elements of your ideal life. Okay. So in this stage, reflection and mindfulness is really important, because you start to really understand what you actually want rather than what you should want. Okay. And I have a lot of resources on this that I'm happy to share. Um, if you feel like you're in the stage one of this process, feel free to reach out to me after this event. Stage two, then you take everything that you learned um, in stage one, right? So, what you love to do, why you love to do it, what your core motivations are, and also the context that you need in order to thrive. You take all of that to start to dream big about what are the things that you really want. Right. And so opening your mind and saying, what if I took a mini retirement and traveled for a year? Or what if I started my own business? Or what if I decided to move to a homestead with my family, right? So those are a few of the different ideas, but these could be, big, crazy ideas that you're like, how could I ever make this happen? Right. And that's what we talk about and think about in stage three, which is experimentation and adjust. Okay. So in this stage, you experiment, right? So you say, okay, how can I take this big dream and break it down into something that I can test out in a day, a week, a month? What are the different ways that I can learn about this? And then figure out, is this really the direction that I want to go? Or do I want to pivot? And so this is what we're going to dive into a lot more over the course of this conversation. Okay. So, what I want to first do is just give us a definition of experimentation. Okay. So, for this, experimentation, I say, is to try out a new concept or way of doing things to make a discovery or to test a hypothesis. So when you think of experimentation, you might be thinking of like an experiment that happens in a lab, right? But I think experimentation is so much bigger than that. It's truly testing out anything new. You could also think about it as like creating a prototype of something if you're more in like the engineering space. But you're testing something out, you might create a prototype, right? And you're figuring out how to discover, right, and learn new things. Um, so let's talk for a couple of minutes about the purpose of experimentation, right? So why would I not necessarily want to jump right into something? Okay, so I can give the example of van life. So in 2021, so my husband and I decided to do a van life experiment rather than immediately saying, "Oh, van life sounds cool. Let's buy a van, sell everything we own, and move into it." Right? I feel like we all saw we all heard about all of that in 2020, 2021. So many people bought vans and RVs and realized they didn't really like it. And a year later, there were so many vans and RVs on the market. Okay. And so, one important reason why experimentation is so important is that we as human beings are pretty terrible at predicting what's actually going to make us happy. Right. And so, in order to see, do we want to spend more time traveling in a van? It was really important for us to test it out. Right. And to see if we liked it in a way that wasn't putting that full upfront investment in right away. Okay. And so, I think experiments can help us do a couple of things. Right. So, first, they can help us build our confidence. And using the camper van example, I would say, originally when we heard about it, we were like, wow, that's really expensive. I don't know. I don't feel like we can do that. Right. Because it's just too expensive. Right. And so as we experimented and as we tested it out, we realized, okay, maybe this expense is actually worth it. Right? And so it built our confidence in that decision to move forward. Okay. And it also built our confidence that we would actually enjoy it. Um, okay. The second one is learning. So we learn important and valuable things throughout the process. So if we, go back to this same example, we learned the types of ways that we like to travel, and we learned how to, simply how to drive and park a large vehicle, and the kinds of food that we can make, right, in a van. And, sort of testing that out on a short trip allowed us to be able to apply all of those things to a longer trip. And then the last thing is that experimentation can just help us to overcome analysis paralysis. Okay, so we had been watching van life YouTube for years, right? And it was cool. We thought it was awesome. Um, right? And we could have just kept watching it for years and thinking about it and, feeling like, oh, well, it's probably not worth it. We don't know. And instead, we started experimenting, right? Instead, we started having conversations with people who had, built out vans, and people who were living that lifestyle. And then we rented a van to test it out ourselves. And then we took some shorter trips and some longer trips to help us understand that lifestyle. And once we started taking action, that paralysis dropped away because we started to answer some of the questions and to visualize what life would look and feel like if we were to move forward. Okay. So these are the three reasons why experimentation can be so valuable for you as you move through a lifestyle design process. So, what I want to talk about next is just what are the actual steps to take to experiment. Okay. So, you have your big idea, right? The thing that you want to do. Um, And what do you do first? How do you start, right? From this big idea to figure out how to actually start taking small, immediate actions on it. Okay. So the very first step is to actually pull out a notebook and write down every single question that you can think of about this potential idea. Okay. And we'll talk through, examples of those in a second. The second step is then once you have that list of questions, you brainstorm and come up with a whole list of ways that you could answer those questions through experiments. And then you take action on them. Pay attention to how you actually feel while you're doing those experiments. I think that mindfulness is incredibly important to know, like, do I actually like this, or is it something that I think I should like? Okay? And then you can reflect after the experience is over and then adjust your plans from there. So it's that four-step process. So determining your questions, brainstorming a list of experiments, choosing the ones you're going to do, doing them, and paying attention to how you feel, reflecting on your learnings, and deciding how you want to adjust. Okay, so let's walk through this a little bit deeper. So, what kinds of questions might you have, right, about your big idea? You might have, like, what resources are needed for this? How much money would I need for this? What skills do I need to have to be able to do, X thing? Okay. Those are often some of the questions that we have. We often wonder too, what does it actually look and feel like on a day-to-day basis? Um, and would I actually enjoy it? Um, right? That's an incredibly good question to ask yourself as you're thinking about experimentation, as we were thinking about van life, we were wondering, is it something that we would actually enjoy, or does it just look glamorous on YouTube? And then if you've identified what some of your values are, you can then say, does it provide me with enough X? Will van life provide us with enough community? Right? Will we be able to, build relationships with people on the road? Will it provide us with enough stability to be able to work? Um, right? So all of those things. I'm actually seeing in the chat, Potato asking if I'll be sharing the slides. Yes, I can, and this will be available after the session, the whole recording as well. Okay, and then the last question oftentimes that people ask is there a way to make money doing this, right? So if it is something related to work or a career or, sometimes even a hobby, right? That's a question that you might be asking. Like, is there a way to make money doing this? How? And then I think a great follow-up question for this is, do I need or want to? So sometimes people start thinking about passion projects that they would be interested in pursuing. And one great question is, do I actually need to monetize it? Or would I prefer not to? And so that's an important question to ask as well. So as you're thinking about your questions, one thing that I find it really helpful to do is listen to take a minute to listen to your inner critic, right? And so maybe your inner critic is saying, so for us, an example, maybe the inner critic is saying you could never spend that much on a camper van. They're way too expensive. Right? And so then what I like to do in this phase is to actually take those comments from my inner critic and turn them into questions to answer. Right? And so the questions to answer were, how much does it actually cost to build out a camper van? And would we feel like that would be worth it to us on our path, right, toward our goals? Right? Or to say, well, you want to be home more often because you want to you want to make sure that you build strong relationships with people in your local area, right? So that could be you can't, right? You can't keep strong friendships if you travel frequently. And right. And so then one question is, how would I be able to strengthen the friendships that I have, even if I am traveling on a fairly frequent basis? Okay, so those are two examples of ways that you could say, okay, what is my inner critic telling me? And instead of believing that that thing is necessarily true, how could I turn that into a question to be able to assess it? Yeah, I'm seeing somebody in the chat saying, like, a pretty worst case scenario of my inner critic is worried that if I uh, that to end up being human trafficked as a massage therapist who lives and travels alone. Right? I think that's a important thing to listen to, and a way to turn that into a question is to say, how can I make sure that I keep myself safe as I live and travel? What are the ways that I could do that? How have other people in a similar field kept themselves safe as they've traveled and, as they live and travel alone? How do, and it could be connecting with, some particular solo female travel groups to find out what do people do to make sure that they keep themselves safe as they're traveling. Yeah, so that's a great one. And I think that's one thing to know is that sometimes our inner critics can bring us to some worst case scenarios. And so figuring out how we can turn those into questions is really important. Okay, so once you have your list of questions, then there's 3 different types of experiments, okay? So you're gonna then brainstorm how many different ways can I think of to answer these questions? Um, and the great thing about brainstorming is you don't have to do everything on your list, right? You just get to brainstorm as many ideas as possible. How could you possibly answer this question? And then you get to choose, right, which ones of these things do you actually want to do or do first? Because as you take action, you'll come up with more ideas. Okay. So the first type of experiment is a conversation. And so conversations are incredibly important, um, to take some time and find someone who is doing the thing that you want to do and find them and do, right, an informational interview. And so you can find someone who has a similar work structure to what you want, or if someone has launched a business doing something similar to what you want to do. Um, and another way too is to actually join networks, right? Through like the Slow-Fi Facebook group, or niche specific things of people who are doing the things that you want to do, to start connecting with people to have real life conversations. Um, I've found that it's completely different to Google something, right? And to say, okay, this is what they say. And to have a conversation with a real person about their real life experience. Okay. So that's the first type of experiment. The second type of experiment is observations or experiences. Okay. So this is where you could actually go and see if there's a way to actually observe the thing that you want to do. So, for example, one thing that I identified back in 2019 was that I would love to run a retreat someday. Um, and I knew that if that was ever gonna become a reality, one of the things that I needed to do as an experiment was actually attend retreats, right? And so I went to a Sense Positive retreat. I went to a FinCon, which is a financial conference. I went to a Camp FI earlier this year, women's personal finance retreat as well. And that gave me a sense of, okay, this is how retreats are put on. This is how, here's the things that I liked about the ones that I went to that I would really want to incorporate. Here's some of the things that I would do differently. Um, and all of that, right? And so it's really helpful if there's ways that you're able to observe someone else doing the thing that you want to do. Okay. And then the third way to experiment is like a beta test, right? Or you might think it in sort of engineering speak, you might think of it as a prototype. Okay. So this is saying, how can I actually take this big idea and shrink it down to something that I would be able to try in an afternoon or a week or a month, right? And so for me, with the retreat example, one of the beta tests that I did was say, okay, maybe I'm not quite ready to run a full retreat right now, but could I run a local meetup? Right? Or could I do a presentation for my local Choose Fi group? Or could I do my own meetups like this, right? And workshops. And so I started taking some of those ideas and testing them out in those small ways. And then launched my coaching programs, which was another experiment. And then did an annual planning retreat for some of the alumni of my main program. Right. And so those were all beta tests and prototypes, right? And ways that I was able to experiment with what would it be like to run a retreat, and would I actually like doing it, and what would be required, um, before actually, diving in and putting in that full monetary and time investment to run a full retreat. Okay. So those are a few examples. And I guess a couple more examples of beta testing. So we mentioned that we did rented a camper van off a website called Outdoorsy for a 10-day trip in 2021. And so what we were originally thinking on that was, okay, in 2021, we'll do a 10-day trip, we'll rent a camper van. And then maybe in 2022, we'll rent a camper van for a month, and then we'll make a decision on whether we want to, build out or buy our own van. And then we actually did the 10-day experiment in 2021 and decided like we're completely sold. We do not need to go and do another experiment. We would much rather put the money that we would invest in that next experiment into the van itself. But because we felt we knew the answer to that already. And then one more example of a beta test that I can share is, so I had a client, Lacey, who was considering starting her own tax prep business. And so one thing that she did was she actually worked for a tax season at H&R Block just to see if she would like doing the taxes and to learn all about it. And so she walked away from that experience saying, like, really enjoyed working with clients, really enjoyed the mental work of doing the tax prep, and really didn't like the bureaucracy of working at H&R Block and really didn't like the sort of being told where to be and when. And so for her, there were things that she liked about it and things that she didn't like about it. And so then she was able to, take everything that she learned to say, okay, how do I actually want to move forward with this? And realize that she could start her own tax business and get rid of the parts of it that she didn't like. I see a question from Jess. How did I know that it was not just excitement of the moment or talking yourself into the enjoyment rather than true enjoyment of the camper van experience? I think that is a really fantastic question. I think one thing that I think is really important is like building up some mindfulness skills. And so for me, over the last 5 years or so, I've been on this journey of figuring out like, what do I actually enjoy and what are the things that, truly light me up versus the things that other people have told me should light me up, right? Or that I've said, you should really like this thing. Right. And so having that sense and really paying attention to like, what is it that I really truly do enjoy in that moment? I think the second thing is I already had a sense of my values. And so I know that I absolutely love travel and adventure. I absolutely love deep connection. And so I was going to get to do, both of those things. And so for me, it was in some ways it was a hypothesis, right? So I was saying, I'm testing this hypothesis. I think I'm going to like it. And I want to make sure that I do. Right. And so for me, it was also looking for, are there things that I don't like about it? Specifically. And then I would say the last thing is we didn't immediately make the decision to buy the camper van, right? And so we didn't come home and the next day we're like, woohoo, we love this. We're going to do it. Right. We took a good month or month and a half talking it through, weighing the options, talking through like what would be the impact of this on our financial goals, and all of that. And so we did also think through it and talk through it, in a really logical way as well, before we made the decision to actually go ahead and buy the camper van. So I think I would say, so there were really three things there. I think there's mindfulness, there's like having, like maybe you have a hypothesis, but seeing if there's ways to actually disprove that hypothesis. And then third is giving yourself a little time to reflect on it and to make sure that that is the direction that you really do truly want to go. Thanks, Jess, for that question. So we're going to jump in here in a couple minutes to examples that were crowdsourced from you awesome folks who are here with us. But before we jump into that, I want to talk a little bit about the upcoming Slow-Fi retreat that's happening in September. And actually so there's 4 tickets available for this. So the rest of the tickets have been sold at this point. And you have until July 21st to buy your ticket. That's the cutoff date for us to then make sure we can do, all of the planning and accommodate for the needs of everyone and get all of the supplies and everything. And so at this retreat, this is going to be a small group of people. So it'll be you and 40 other people who are interested in slow-fi and lifestyle design and living their absolute best life along the path to fi. In Winter Park, Colorado. So we're going to be going to a beautiful mountain location to connect with each other and to explore lifestyle design concepts and the ways that you may want to make changes in your life moving forward. And so this retreat, we're going to focus on cultivating a like-minded community, exploring a variety of different lifestyle design options. And so I have speakers who will be joining us who have experimented with a ton of different kinds of things. So it could be semi-retirement, nomadic travel with a family, someone who, has their own business with a bunch of different income streams, and just a bunch of really, really interesting people who are designing lives that they love, who I look up to share the kinds of things that they've learned and the experiences that they have. And then we're going to spend some time helping you gain clarity on what you actually need to move forward on the things that you're interested in pursuing, and to create an experimentation and an action plan to make those things a reality. And then beyond that, we're going to have just a ton of fun and enjoy the beauty of this location in Colorado. There's, a disc golf course. We're going to do some group hikes and campfires and just spend some time together. So one thing that I'll say is I think there's something pretty special about an in-person retreat. I think part of it is that it's like an intense burst of inspiration and community building, where we get out of our typical space, we go to a beautiful location and, have no distractions. I think for me, that's where I tend to have my, most life-changing insights. And then getting to connect in person with people, I think is incredibly valuable, right? It's one thing to connect over, Zoom meetings or social media or conversations like this, and another to have all of those informal interactions that add up to a meaningful connection and conversation. Okay. So if this is something that sounds great to you, I would encourage you to claim one of those last 4 spots by July 21st. And we'll share, and actually Corey's on here. Maybe Corey can share that link in the chat so you can take a look at it and figure out if it's something that you want to join us at. Okay, so now let's jump into these real life examples. So I really appreciate everyone who submitted their ideas and examples through the survey or through social media or in the Slow-Fi group. And I chose four, but I'm hoping that as we walk through them, you can actually start to get the juices flowing, right? And start to think about what kinds of ideas, what kinds of questions you have about your own ideas, and what kinds of experiments that you could start, and consider doing. Okay. So as we're getting started here, I would encourage you actually to take a minute to think about like what is one of your big ideas? Like that you would love to pursue, but potentially feels out of reach. Okay. I would encourage you to take a quick second and put some of those ideas into the chat. So you can let us know what are you going to be applying this process to? And then if we have time, we can also, jump into other examples as well. Okay, so just to recap that question, put in the chat, um, what is something that you would absolutely love to do in your life, but might feel out of reach right now? Okay, and you can put that question. You can answer that question whenever, and I will as I jump into examples. Okay, so one of the examples that we got from the survey was from Lucy, who said that her goal was to ask for a 4-day work week, and at first still be working like 40 hours per week, Monday through Thursday, so that she could start doing more travel. And then shift over time to working 3 days a week and only doing right 25 to 30 hours a week. Okay. So I thought this was a really great example and actually like already has some experimentation embedded in it, right? In some ways. But the first thing that we would do is to come up with a list of questions, right? So if this was you, right? What questions would you have about asking for a 4-day work week or traveling more or potentially shifting to a 3-day work week eventually? Okay. So I'm thinking of a few questions here. So one would be, how much money is enough for me? Like, how much money do I actually need to make to cover my expenses and meet my short and long-term financial goals? How much money would I actually need to make if I was working part-time? Um, right? One question is, how much money would it actually cost to start doing more local travel on the weekends? Right? So it sounded like that was one thing that Lucy wanted to do. Another question is my employer amenable to alternative schedules and part-time work? Are there other people who already do this? And is there an openness to testing out something new? Another question might be, would I actually like working 10-hour days? Or would I prefer reducing my hours on a 4-day work week down to like 30 hours or 32 hours a week? Um, right? Or another question could be, how could I tailor my role so that I could gain more flexibility in the future? Right? Or another question is, will I actually enjoy traveling frequently? Or would I want to do something else in the time that I gain back? Okay, so these are some questions as I was, sort of channeling what Lucy might be thinking. Um, and then I brainstormed some potential experiments that Lucy could take to help answer these questions. Okay. So I'm thinking of conversations. So Lucy could have conversations with someone who actually does a like 4 10-hour day schedule to find out how did they negotiate that and do they actually like it. um, right, she could talk with someone who works part-time, And these could be at her employer or elsewhere. Um, right. And or she could talk to like-minded people who, work 4-hour weeks and love to take weekend trips, to figure out the kinds of travel that she might be interested in doing. Um, and then another conversation, she could talk with her boss or HR about the openness to alternative schedules or part-time work. I think one question that I often get from people is, well, what if they say no? Um, and I just think now you have more data, right? Like you have more data about whether you want to stay with this employer on a long-term basis. Okay. And then for Lucy, I'm thinking of observations. Okay. So I'm thinking one observation is if she could find someone at her employer who currently has an alternative schedule, and pay attention to the type of work that they do and what their day to day actually looks like. So that could be important. And then in terms of a beta test, a couple ideas were, could Lucy use vacation days to take a Friday off and plan a long weekend trip, right? So that's a way to test it out in, a really short amount of time. Or from there, could she say, I'm going to use vacation days to take every Friday off for the next month, to see if I like that schedule and to just get a sense of whether it works, and whether you enjoy doing the 4 days a week. Um, and then from there, you could ask for, a change in schedule, for a period of time. So it wouldn't necessarily have to be forever, right? You could say, I'd like to test out a 4-10s schedule for 3 to 6 months as an experiment to see how it works, and we can assess it together at a later date. Okay. So those are some experimentation options, that I think Lucy could take to explore this 4-hour or 3-hour work week. Okay. So let's talk through another example. And so I see a number of people talking about wanting to start their own businesses, in the chat. Um, and so this one could apply to you. And so I heard from Brienne, that she'd like to make a career shift and start her own business. She's currently getting education and certification to build a business that includes things like yoga, mindfulness, breath work, meditations, and retreats. Um, and she says shifting to an income that's pieced together feels scary, and I want to be smart about it. And so, yeah, I think regardless of what kind of business you might want to start, some of these questions and the types of experiments might apply in your situation as well. So as we think through the kinds of questions, that people have as they consider starting their own business, I had so many of these same questions, as I was thinking about it. So one of the first questions we might ask is, how much money would I actually need to make as an entrepreneur? And how much would I need to make in the short term, right? Do I have a runway to make a transition? What does that runway look like? And how much money would I need to make in the long term, right? And one of these questions, I think, if you listen to your inner critic and then flip it into a question, is I could never make money doing this, right? So then one of the questions that you might ask is, how do people make money doing this, right? So it's an easy way to just shift that to say, to turn it into a question, um, because there's so many ways to answer that question. Okay. Other questions could be, what do I need to learn to build a business? Do I feel confident in my craft? Um, right. And what can I do to build confidence in my craft? If I don't feel a level of confidence, is that because I need more education? Or is it because I need to work through some imposter syndrome? Okay. What would help to get me to a place where I feel this level of confidence? And do I feel confident in marketing and sales strategies? Or is that an area for learning and growth as well? And then another line of questioning is, do I want to start a business on the side while I'm still working? Do I want to do that while I'm working full time? Would I want to reduce my hours to part time while I build a business? Or do I want to quit and focus fully on my business? And that's could be a good option for people who have a runway to be able to do that and have a strong business idea. Um, right. And then the question is like, what kind of business do I want to run? What kinds of products or services do I want to have? Um, and would I enjoy it? And then thinking back when I was considering um, quitting my job to focus on my business fully, one of the questions that I had was, would running my own business provide me with enough social connection? That was something that I was really worried about. And so I came up with a bunch of different, experiments and ways that I could see what kinds of connection that I could have. Okay. So those are probably some of the questions that you might have if you're thinking about starting a business. If you have additional ones that you're thinking about, feel free to drop those into the comments, and I'll start talking through what some of the options for experimentation would be for those of you who are interested in starting a business. Okay. So first, let's talk about conversations. Right. So conversations, you could have conversations with other entrepreneurs. So people who are doing similar work to the kinds of things that you want to do, or people who are just entrepreneurs more generally. I think there's a lot of things that can be applicable across, different fields. And you could talk with them about what are their best days like, right? What are their worst days like? What are their challenges, their lessons learned? Um, right. And then you can talk to them about their business structure, how you potentially want to structure yours, and how they made a transition. And then another option, if you want to start a business, is to actually have conversations or like informational interviews with people who would be your potential customers about what their pain points are and how you could like how your product or service could potentially help them to be able to create something that would actually truly be helpful. Okay. So those are some of the conversations that you could have. Observations. So I'm thinking specifically for Brienne. Um, right? She could attend classes, attend retreats, sign up and participate in programs that would be similar to the types of things that you might want to offer. And then these would allow you to see what you would want to do similarly or differently. Okay. And then for beta tests here, there's a few ideas that I was thinking about. So one was just practice your craft and invite others to join you. So you could do like a meditation for your friends and family, right? Or do like a yoga class. Um, right. You could do a free workshop or an event to just like get your feelers out there and understand the experience. You could start sharing the things that you know on YouTube, social media, or you could actually then start and run a beta program. So choose if you wanted to do a class, a course, a retreat, an event. And to be clear, for beta programs, you do not need to do those things for free. You can do them for feedback, right? You can do them and get feedback from them. But for example, when I ran my first beta program, I charged about 2/3 of the price that I do today. And so you don't need to, do a no cost or low cost beta program. If you know that what you're providing would be incredibly valuable. Okay, so let's get into another example because I know some of you are interested in travel. Right. And so I heard from Leslie, who would love to become a nomadic traveler and slow travel for a few years. Um, and she asked, would it be crazy to sell my home and do that? And then shares that one consideration is that she currently works in a career that must be done in person, but has a lower salary in other countries. Okay, so some of the questions that Leslie might be thinking here are, what options does she have to do slow travel for a couple of years? Would she need to work abroad, or could she take a mini retirement? Um, if she did decide to work abroad, how much money would she actually need to make to cover her expenses and meet her short and long-term financial goals? Um, Another question that I have is for Leslie, or to ask, is, do you love your career, or would you consider other career options to be able to do this? Right. And then there's some logistical questions like, how much does it actually cost to slow travel abroad? Um, and then around the question of, would I be crazy to sell my home? The question that I have here is, how attached are you to your home, and how would you feel about selling it? Um, if you do feel pretty attached to your home, would it be possible to rent it out instead of selling it? If right, if you wanted to come back. Um, and then, there's so many other questions too of like, what are visa requirements to work elsewhere? How would you get those credentials? Would you actually enjoy living a slow travel or nomadic lifestyle? Um, right, and all of those things. And so some examples of experiments here would be to have some conversations. So talk with people who've taken mini retirements or who work abroad, or who work in a country you'd be interested in going to, or who work in your same career, who work abroad, or people who are using those skills for other things. Um, some observations. So, a way that you could potentially observe is to find a YouTube channel of nomadic travelers to get a sense of what the day to day could look and feel like. Though I would say beware, because you'll want to find people who tell you about the ups and downs and not just the glamour of it. And then for this one, there's some beta tests to do here, right? So Leslie could try taking like a 2 to 3 week vacation abroad, to slow travel to 1 or 2 locations, or she could negotiate a 2 to 3 month sabbatical, or simply quit her job and plan to find another upon returning to do, a smaller version of this for a couple of months. Or start applying to foreign jobs to see what's out there, um, and figure out, and potentially while you're traveling, even for the shorter term, to see if there's a way to do a short or medium term rental of your house while you travel. Right. And so I think there's ways to help overcome some of this analysis paralysis by just starting to have these conversations and take some of those small actions. Um, okay. So what I want to do is just a quick recap, of the process. And actually, since we're getting a little bit um, low on time, what I want to do is just do a quick recap, of experimentation, and then we can jump into questions, and some of the Q&A. Okay. So for experimentation, just to recap for us, the steps that you'll take in this process are to, one, write down as many questions as you can possibly think of, about the idea that you have. Okay. The second thing is to brainstorm experiments to help you answer those questions. So, conversations, observations, or beta tests. Okay. And then choose the things you want to do, take action, and pay attention to how the things make you feel. as you're doing them, and then spend some time reflecting and deciding how you want to move forward. And based on what you learned, how you want to adjust. Okay. So let's dig into a couple of the questions. And if there's any questions that you all have feel free to put those in the chat. So the first question that I'll talk through is, what are problems I don't even know to consider, and how do I figure these problems ahead of time so I can plan for them? I think that's a really good question because I think I always want to know what are the pitfalls and what are the things that I'm going to need to plan for. I'm a classic over planner. And so I think the great thing about experimentation is sometimes you just aren't going to know the problems ahead of time, and that it requires experimentation to figure out what the problems are. And so if you can figure out what the problems are in a low stakes way, um, then you'll be able to solve those problems before it gets to something bigger, right? So for example, I'm thinking about, right, when I started planning, a variety of different workshops and, things like that. Like, there's no way that I would have been able to foresee the challenges that came up, right? As I was working through them. So, the questions, the level of nerves that I had going into it, and just the reactions that people had. But doing it in a low stakes way was able to help me be able to handle those things when I got into things that were a little bit bigger. Right. And so taking that action helps you to figure out what the challenges are, when things are a little bit low stakes. And I think if when we I think one thing that's helped me too is thinking about, like, everything that I do is in some ways an experiment, right? So it's this experimentation mindset. And so if I try something that totally falls flat, I can see it as an experiment, right? And so I can say, "That wasn't a failure. Like, actually, that was an incredibly successful experiment because I learned something really valuable from it." Um, okay. So the next question is, how do I deal with regret? I thought this was a really good question because I think sometimes we'll have regrets for the things that we choose to do, and sometimes we'll have regrets for the things that we don't choose to do. And so, as we're thinking about the ways that we want to move forward and the small actions that we want to take, I think that's a really important question to ask ourselves, is to say, will I regret doing this or not doing this more? And I think oftentimes we'll regret not doing it. And so if we can break it into those smaller steps and experiments, it makes it a lot easier to start taking action because it doesn't feel like one big scary leap, right? It feels like I'm taking one small action, figuring out what I learned from it, adjusting, taking another small action, right? And continuing to move forward from there. So hopefully we won't need to live with, the regrets of not trying out, and moving toward the thing that we really want. Um, Another question that came in from the survey was, what if I don't actually have any solid ideas? What can I do to generate some? And so from that, I want to remind us, I think, of that lifestyle design process that we talked about at the beginning, of this conversation, where I think it's okay if you're in a stage where you're saying, I'm not quite sure what I want. Like, I've been sort of living like society script for what I should do for so long that I've lost touch with who I am and what I really want. And if that's the case, that's okay. And where you may want to start is on an earlier stage of this lifestyle design process. And I'll pull up this slide. Um, yeah, I'll pull up this slide here, right? You may want to start in stage one where you're focusing on what do I really love to do? What are my core motivations? Right? And what is the context in which I need to thrive? Right? Those are three really, really important things. And this is actually what we do in my lifestyle design group coaching program called Design a Life You Love. We start in stage one and move through stage 2 and 3 throughout the process, but do a number of different types of activities where we do some reflection, some mindfulness sort of building um, skills where we actually track our days over the course of about 6 weeks to figure out what are the things that I do that really energize me and engage me that I would want to do more of. And what are the things that are really draining that I want to do less of, right? So that along with reflection on things like your ideal day and your peak experiences, all of those things can come together to help you gain some clarity on the elements of your ideal life so that you can use that as a launching point for dreaming big. Okay. So I'll share this with you after the session and more about this process. If you find yourself in, feeling like you're more in stage one and you're ready to identify what do I really want and what's important to me so that I can, come up with these really exciting, unique dreams and goals for my life. I will share that with you. Okay, so back here, I think another question that I thought was a really good one was, is there anything you tried in your experiment that you thought you'd like, but you didn't? And I think that was a really, really great question because there's so many things that we might experiment with that we don't really like, and that's okay. Right. So for me, one of the things that I started to experiment with um, pretty early on was I thought I would be really like, I always loved to do photography when I was a kid. And so I thought I would get really into that. But I tried it out. I took a photography class. I thought maybe it would turn into something. And then I realized like, I actually really prefer to just be in the moment and experiencing things rather than constantly taking photos. And so that was something that, I experimented with and decided like, no, I don't really want to move forward in that direction. So that was a great question as well. And then I think one of the last questions that I have and got from the survey was, what safety nets have you put in place to overcome potential future issues? And I think this is a really fantastic question because I think with experimentation, I think it reduces the level of risk that you're taking. But no matter what, when you're taking action, there is some sort of level, right, of risk. And so for us, I would say it was really important. So actually, I'll talk about this with concrete examples. And so there's a number of different things that we've done to experiment. And the things that made us feel confident in doing that, I think were a few. So first, when I decided to start a business, I was actually working part-time. I was originally working part-time because that was what my mental health could handle, and then eventually decided not to go up to full-time, um, work when I had the opportunity to, because I had realized that I had the financial safety net in place and I had reached coast financial independence, which is the point where the money you've already saved will grow, right? That you've invested will grow to provide you with a comfortable traditional retirement. And so I realized from that that maybe I don't ever need to work full time ever again, right? And so that was a safety net for me. And then as I started my business, I started it on the side, of that part-time job. And for me, that was helpful. And I think the main reason is that, like, I am a pretty risk-averse person. And so I think had I completely quit my job to start my business, I think I it may have been harder for me to make decisions that were good for myself, for my mental health, for the long-term success of my business. Um, like I feel like it could have been more challenging to not focus on short-term profits, right? But because I was working full-time, I was able to or part-time, I was able to ask myself, like, how would I run this business if I didn't actually need the income from it? Because I wanted to run it in a way that felt really good, and that, made me happy and that it would allow me to really enjoy it. And so I let that be my guiding force. And then when I saw a track record of success, then I was able to say, okay, I'm ready to make a transition now and really take this bet, right? Take this bet on myself. And so that was another thing as well. In addition to having some financial safety nets in place too. So having an emergency fund, as well as a sort of an additional cash runway, that I sometimes like to call FU money, to enable us to take some of these risks. Okay. Well, those are some of the questions, that we got. Thank you, everyone, for joining in, and sharing your ideas and questions. I want to do just a quick recap, of this conversation. So today we covered what experimentation is, the process to start experimenting, concrete examples to help you get the juices flowing. Okay. And so I see we still have a bunch of people on here, which is awesome. So what I actually want to do is I want to hear from you. So go to the comment section, and let us know, what did you learn from this discussion? And what action do you want to take as a result? Okay. So what did you learn, during this conversation? And what small step will you take? How do you want to take your big dream, and translate that into an immediate small step, that you could take? And I'd love to see some answers here, in the chat. And while we're doing that, I'll look at a few of the other ideas that you shared, that you want to do. So I see, Jenna wanting to quit her full-time job and work less and become location independent. Awesome. That was exactly my goal about 4 years ago. I see, actually, the person with the handle Goldilocks saying, "I love the idea of taking, the voice of your inner critic and turning it into a question." Yeah, that's fantastic. Um, Quality life massage therapy, the idea of taking a couple of sabbatical months to experiment. Yep. Yeah, I think the one important thing is like this isn't all or nothing. We don't have to say, I'm going to immediately quit, right? And I'm going to do X thing forever. We can say, I'm going to take a couple months, right, to test something out on a sabbatical. So, Shearston, using LinkedIn as a resource to find freelance management and leadership coaches. Yes. So you can learn from them and what they're doing, and maybe have some informational conversations. And Jaquita, schedule conversations with folks who've taken sabbaticals from their job and find out how they did it. Yeah, absolutely. So how they negotiated that. And you could find out, some of the folks who did that and went back to their jobs and what their experience was, and people who took sabbaticals where they quit their job and didn't go back and what their experience was. So that's a great thing too. I know my spouse is currently on a sabbatical, but decided that originally he was thinking that he would take a sabbatical and go back, and then decided he probably wouldn't actually want to go back, so just decided to quit instead and give himself some time before figuring out exactly what he wanted to do next. And Carrie, the formula to apply to start making traction on future life changes. Start tracking the things that energize you. Yes, I absolutely love that. And just start asking these same questions with your spouse. That's a really fantastic one. Yeah, and Lauren, learning the value of low stakes experiments. Yeah, and experimenting with more travel and less work by planning some 4-day work weeks and 3-day weekends this summer. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining this conversation. And I really appreciate hearing your insights and the things that you're learning and what you plan to take action on. And we will be hosting another one of these meetups next month, so stay tuned for that. And then one thing that I'll say is we recently started a YouTube channel about a month and a half ago. And so if you want to see more of the content that we have here on YouTube, hit the like button of this and subscribe to our channel so that you'll get notified when we have new content come out. Awesome. Thanks so much. And I will see you all later.